My colleague from New York, Mr. Nadler, suggested that you were naive for thinking that the 22 separate times the president said he lacked the power to do what he did, you and I should have realized that that was a political comment and not a legal comment. And so what I would ask you to please consider is requiring a disclaimer to go beneath every comment made by an elected official so we can know going forward whether he or she really means it or whether it's just for political expediency. Because I mistakenly thought the chief law enforcement officer for the entire country would mean what he said when he was making a legal observation, and it was just news to me from Mr. Nadler that all of that was just political grandstanding. So if you can work around the First Amendment limitations and require disclaimers so we really know whether a candidate or an office holder means what he or she is saying, it'd be helpful to me, and I wouldn't feel as naive, and perhaps you wouldn't either, for relying on what the president said. Now, Professor, what are the limits of the doctrine of prosecutorial discretion?
Well, the main limits are the ones that I laid out with more detail in the written statement, but to summarize them briefly, one, the president cannot refuse to substantially spend the resources Congress has provided. Because
so if we fully funded everything he wanted with respect to DHS, he could not suspend any deportations?
I think that is an unanswered question. I'm confident.
Well, that's what you just said.
No, I said that was one limit.
But I just removed that limit. So if we were to fully fund that, he would lack the discretion to not enforce that law. Correct?
I suppose that's theoretically possible. It's just never been decided by a court because it would be rare to find a law enforcement agency so flush with resources.
What I'm trying to get at, Professor, is if your district attorney decided that he or she was not going to enforce or prosecute any heroin cases because he or she just thought the war on drugs was a lost cause, other than elections, what remedy would the legislative branch have if they disagreed strenuously with that executive branch employee's wholesale refusal to enforce the law? Well, what remedy exists for us?
Well, the legislature could very specifically supersede the decision. There's nothing in the statute that specifically supersedes the president's priorities. But
so,
if the legislature was
so you mean the legislative branch could put in that statute the word shall? You shall prosecute.
That would not nearly be enough. We all know that in the
Well, what should we put in our DHS funding to let the president know? Help us write that bill, Professor.
Well, I don't know that I could draft it off the top of my head.
Well, take a crack at it.
Okay, well, the legislature Congress could do something similar to what it did when it mandated very specific priorities. There's language that specifically mandates a priority on national security. There's language
but why does the legislative branch have to pick priorities? Why can't we just say we want the law enforced?
Well, I was offering one option for how a statute could be drafted.
Well, you would agree with me that the ultimate remedy is the ballot box, right? If a DA is not enforcing the law, his or her voters can vote them out, right?
Well, yes and no. There are certain instances in which plaintiffs have been found to have standing to challenge prosecutorial discretion, but I don't see this as being one of them.
Do you think the consequences of the elections might have been why the president waited until after the midterms to issue his executive order as opposed to before it?
Well, yes and no. I'm not sure it's the outcome of the election so much as the desire to avoid the kind of political confusion that would result.
Well, it's not political confusion, Professor, with all due respect. This is legal confusion because I'm trying to understand what the limits of prosecutorial discretion are. There are at least 3 different categories of law. There are certain laws that say you can't do something like possess child pornography. There are certain laws that require you to do something like register for selective service. Right. And then there are laws that Congress passes which require the executive branch to do things, for instance, turn in a budget by a certain date. Is your testimony that the executive has the power to use prosecutorial discretion in all 3 categories of law?
It would depend on the facts, and it would depend on the specific.
Well, give me a fact pattern where a president can refuse to do something that Congress tells him or her to do by a certain date. That is not prosecutorial discretion, with all due respect. Professor, that is anarchy.
I agree with you, Congressman, that Congress, if specific enough, could foreclose a particular type of exercise of prosecutorial discretion. My only point is that they have not done so in this case.
Well, let me ask you this, because I'm out of time. Can the president suspend all deportations, and if not, why not?
I believe not, because that would contravene both the congressional intent in passing the Immigration and Nationality Act generally, but
Well,
also
how far
more
can he go? Out of the 11 million, if 4 million's okay, can he go up to 8?
My answer to that question is the same as the one I gave a little bit earlier. It's impossible to answer without the empirical knowledge of whether that would still leave him with the ability to substantially spend the resources Congress has provided. But if
What
he
I would
has,
love,
he
if
could.
you can, and I'm out of time, I want you, and maybe it's a suggestion for your next law review article, I want to know if Congress fully funds DHS, does the president then lack the discretion, citing the apportionment of resources to exercise discretion?
And that
Would
question,
you?
that question has simply never been answered.
Well, and
before
I'd love
because
for you
it's
to
never
take a
arisen.
crack at it in your next law review article. I'd love for you to take a crack at it if you'd be willing to do so. Chair,